everyone! Today I'm going to show you a really cool technique for painting watercolor flowers like these. It's so fun, I can't wait to show you. Here are the materials you'll need for today. All of my materials are in my Amazon storefront, which I have linked down in the description. I've got my water and a paper towel. They're just out of the frame so you can see the painting more up close and in detail. You'll need watercolor paper, preferably 100% cotton, 140-pound cold press. I'm using paper that I've cut out from this pad, and this piece is about 4 by 6 inches in size. We'll be sketching a little with a pencil. That means we'll also need an eraser. A kneadable eraser is ideal, but any eraser will do. The brushes I'm using today are my size 6 round Princeton Velvet Touch brush and my cheap size 4 round brush by Transin. I'm just obsessed with the sharp point on it for stems. Lastly, you'll need a pretty firm brush that you don't mind scrubbing on the paper, so not your highest quality brush. I'm using a size 2 round Princeton Snap. You'll want it to be smaller than the brush you use for petals. I'm going to refer to this as the thirsty brush throughout this video, and I'll explain why soon. All of my paints are Winsor and Newton Cotton. These colors are only suggestions. You can choose any color for your flower petals and any green for your stems and leaves, and still follow this tutorial just as easily. For the flowers, I'm using permanent rose mixed with a little bit of burnt sienna, believe it or not. The burnt sienna warms up the pink a little bit and gives it a tiny bit of a peachy color that I really like. And for the stems and leaves, I'm sticking to my trusty old Hooker's Green with a dab of Alizarin Crimson. Let's start by sketching out our stems just to give us something to go by and to help us space the flowers evenly around the page. If you aren't comfortable free drawing this or loosely painting the petals, I've got a free link to an outline I sketched for this painting in the description that you can trace. We're going to do 3 flowers because, as I've mentioned in previous videos, odd numbers are more aesthetically pleasing. So I tend to paint in odd numbers, but not all the time. Be sure to make all 3 stems different lengths and bending in different directions. We don't want them all to look exactly the same. When you're satisfied with your stems, grab your kneadable eraser and roll it over your sketch to pull off some of that graphite. This will lighten things up so that pencil lines don't show through your painting. Now before we paint, let me show you what we're going to do with these petals. We're going to make something called blooms. I'll show you what a bloom is. When you have watercolor paint on paper and then add drops of water to the paint, the water repels the pigment and pushes it to the outside edge of the water drops. This creates a lighter space where you dropped the water and a hard, dark edge of pigment around the perimeter of the water you dropped in. Here's what it looks like dry. You can see how light it is in the center where I put each drop and how dark it is along the outside edges. We're going to do that with each petal. It will make more sense in a minute. I also want to show you, in case you've never explored with this, that water, especially on watercolor paper, is very cool. You can see I'm placing these big drops of water on the paper and they stay as perfectly formed droplets. I can stick a brush inside of the droplet and wiggle it around and the drop still holds its shape. If you're gentle enough, the water will not leave the boundary of the outside edge of this droplet. We're going to use this knowledge for our flower petals too. So let's paint. Grab your size 6 round brush and dip it in your flower petal color. So for me, that's this pinkish color. Make sure that your brush is holding enough water. For today's painting, it's better to have more water than not enough water. So I found the top of my center stem, and this flower is going to have 5 petals. So I'm loosely painting a flower petal coming down off of the point of that stem. If you trace this from the outline I provided, then just fill in that petal with paint. 2 of our 5 petals are going to kind of be hanging down below the flower. It will look like a flower that has been blooming for a while and the petals are getting close to falling off. I'm purposely making this petal a little jagged on the side. I just like how delicate it looks when the petals aren't all perfectly round. Now here's the fun part. Take your size 6 brush that you just used to paint the petal and dip it in your water so that it's fully loaded with water. Then we'll dab it in the middle of the flower petal we just painted and leave a large blob of water behind, just like a bloom. You want a lot of water, enough to fill your petal. Add more drops if needed. Then use your brush to move the water around inside of your petal and push it out towards the edges. Like I showed you earlier, the water will not go outside of the petal you just painted if you're gentle. The edges of your petals will act like a boundary or a fence and hold the water in. Once your petal is completely covered with water, grab your thirsty brush and make sure it's clean and dried off. You're going to let it soak up all of the water that you've just put in your petal. It's a bit of a tedious process, but it's very worth it. You're going to dab your brush onto the petal, soak up as much paint as you can, and then rinse your brush, dry your brush on your paper towel, and repeat until you've absorbed all of that extra water that we just put into the petal. You'll see that this leaves behind a really hard edge around the perimeter of the petal. And it's so delicate and elegant, and the center of our petal is a lighter, softer shade compared to that hard outer edge. The water droplet we dropped in there forced the pigment to the outer edge, making it dark and leaving behind a lighter center. Be sure that as you're soaking up the paint, your thirsty brush never touches the edge. If it does, it will soften that hard line. We want that petal to dry completely before painting the next petal so that they don't bleed into each other. So I'm just going to grab my hairdryer and dry this up really quick. I've got my size 6 round brush again, and I've dipped it in the pink, and now I'm going to paint the petal on the other side of the flower that is also kind of hanging down. Again, I'm not trying to make it perfectly round, and I'm moving my brush around until I have a petal that I think balances out the one on the other side. I'm making sure that it's completely saturated with paint. Now it's time to grab a drop of water on the brush, and I'm dropping the clean water into the center of my petal, just like we did for the previous petal. Now we'll push that water around within the petal, trying to make sure it gets all the way to the edge to give us that hard edge that we want. Now that my petal is full of water, I'm going to take my thirsty brush and make sure it's clean and dry, and I'm going to soak up this paint with it. Remember, every time my brush leaves the frame, I'm washing it and drying it so it's ready to soak up more paint. Do you see why I call it the thirsty brush? By drying our brush, we make it thirsty, and then we use it to slurp up the paint as if it's a straw. While this petal is drying, we can move over and do this left flower. This one is just going to be a bud, and it's only going to have 2 petals showing. So let's paint this kind of teardrop shape for the first part of the bud, and we're going to repeat the same exact process that we did with the first 2 petals. Add in a drop of water and soak it up with the thirsty brush. Let's add a petal to our third stem. This flower is going to be facing upwards with just 3 petals showing. So the first part I'm going to paint is the center petal because that one is going to be coming from behind the flower. Then after that dries, we'll add on the 2 outer petals that are in front. I think you get the idea now for adding in the drop of water and soaking it up with the thirsty brush. So I'm going to speed this part up a little bit. Check to see if our top petal in the center flower is dry yet. A good way to test if your paint is dry is to take the back of your hand and lightly press it against the paint. If it feels cool at all, that means it's still wet, and this one still is, so I'm going to pull out the hairdryer just to be safe. I'm loosely painting this petal and following the same routine as the previous petals. Let's finish that bud. I'm adding another teardrop shaped petal, partially layering on top of the first teardrop shape. Flower bud petals are usually a little bit darker before they fully bloom, so I left that paint on there a little bit longer before I soaked it up. This process is a lot like dyeing Easter eggs. Just like the longer you soak the Easter egg in the dye, the darker the color is on the egg. The longer you let the pigment soak on your paper, the darker it will be. The quicker you get the pigment off of the paper with your thirsty brush, the lighter it will be. Let's finish up the rest of these petals together, and I'll chime back in when it's time for the stems. I'm using my size 4 round brush for the stems. Whatever brush you choose for your stems, just pick something that has a nice sharp point on it because we want to keep our stems as thin as possible. It's easier to make them thicker if we want to, but it's pretty much impossible to make them thinner after we've made them too thick. Let's grab some of this Hooker's green mixed with a little bit of Alizarin crimson. You can use any green you'd like. Let's trace over our pencil lines for the stems with the green using the very tip of the brush. I'm using a pretty dark value of green here. I'm adding some leaves around the bud first. I'm just wrapping the base of the bud in green leaf shapes and throwing in some tiny leaves below that. Now we're going to do the same thing that we did with our petals. I'm adding a drop of water, pushing that water towards the outer edge of the leaves, then soaking up the water with my thirsty brush. I love how you can see the details of the pink petals beneath the green leaves. This technique is just so cool. It's time to add more leaves. I'm adding a leaf to this flower on the right. Make sure your brush is wet enough so that your paint goes further before drying up. I'm drawing a stem, pressing down on the belly of the brush as I continue to drag out, and then lifting back up to the point of the brush. Now I'm coming below the leaf and using the same brush stroke, but I'm leaving a little gap here at the base. I'm making sure my entire leaf is covered in enough pigment and water. It got a little dry on me, so that's why I'm painting back over the leaf a little. Now I'm adding my drop of clear water and pushing the water out towards the perimeter of the leaf. And now I'm grabbing my thirsty brush and soaking up all of that water. You know the drill. I first saw leaves painted this way by an artist named Bliss of Colors, and I just love the way they look for this style of watercolor painting. She's on YouTube as well and worth checking out. Let's paint the rest of these leaves together. I'll speed this part up a little bit. Once your leaves are exactly how you want them, you're all done. How cool is this method of painting with watercolor? I'm excited to try this for some other flowers. Thank you so much for joining me. If you liked this video, it would mean so much to me if you would subscribe. Leave any questions or comments you have below and I'll be sure to reply to you. I'll see you in the next one.